So, this is another chapter in SCCO Chain Reaction, and I'm Peter Cockhill, and this evening I've got with me Helen Coutts, who's a wonderful osteopath who works with us in our team at Stillpoint in Bath. So we want to ask you just a few questions, Helen, about your osteopathic life. So first question really is just to tell us, just briefly, what was your inspiration? What was your first ever contact, or how did osteopathy first ever enter into your life?
It was actually by my first boyfriend at school.
Wow.
Whose mum happened to be a secretary at the local osteopaths.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
so
how
I'd
did
never
that,
heard.
and how did that inspire you? Did you have a thought at the time, like this is something that you wanted to do?
Well, I just wanted to work in health. So I originally wanted to be a physio because that's all I'd heard of in rural country Australia.
Okay. I have to say, Helen comes from Australia.
If you haven't detected the accent.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why I thought it would be very interesting to bring her into this chain reaction series, to bring in something from down under.
A bit of bogan influence.
Yeah. A healthy input.
Yeah.
Yeah. So first of all, it was going to be physio. So that's interesting because I had a similar thing where I thought I was going to do something else and then ended up doing osteopathy. So just tell us.
Really?
Just tell us a little more about that shift. So you're thinking of doing physiotherapy, and then you hear about osteopathy, and what was the process after that led you away from physiotherapy into osteopathy?
Well, I guess it was just the selection process at uni. So I went and met Pete, actually, who was the local osteopath, and he seemed like a very sensible, kind man. And I thought, well, that must be quite a nice profession. So I applied. Alongside physio, and then actually just the university process, I got into osteopathy. So without really actually knowing much about it at all. So it was a bit of a fluke. Right.
And had you had to do all the sciences, you were already prepared, because presumably if you were going to do physiotherapy, you had all the training in order to go straight into college.
Yeah. So you had to do certain subjects. Yeah.
And at that point, was it what was the structure of the course in Australia? Was it a 4-year full-time course, 3-year full-time course, or
5-year full-time course?
5-year.
Yeah.
And it leads automatically to an MSc, doesn't it? Or it did when you did it.
Yeah. So it's a Bachelor of Applied Science and then a Master's in Osteopathy.
Yeah. So. Was there any particular influence that people that you met in your undergraduate training that led you in a direction from, within your undergraduate body?
Actually, probably not at university, at undergraduate level. I probably went into this stream of osteopathy sort of through word of mouth. So a couple of the Australian osteopaths, Maxwell and Anthony Norrie, I think, run a summer school that a lot of my friends at university attended one summer, and they all raved about it, but I never actually went. So I'd heard about it through them. And then it was just sort of a series of coincidences that led me to this now. So I went and worked in New Zealand straight away when I graduated at a practice in Whangarei.
In?
Whangarei.
Lovely. Is that a holiday destination?
Yeah.
And who was that with?
It was with a gentleman called Ben Evans. So he trained at the ESO.
Okay.
And he did a lot of tutorials with osteopaths there, and he had an associate at the time called Jonathan Evans, who was really into cranial osteopathy.
So you managed to come in under the umbrella of a cranial osteopathic involuntary mechanism practice that enabled you to develop the way you wanted to.
Wow, it's just, I went in there just with a really open mind, and they had a lot of different osteopaths that had worked there. But both Ben and Jonathan were quite passionate about that form of osteopathy, I guess.
Yeah.
And that was my first insight into it. So.
Okay. So then obviously we need to ask the question, why the big pull to come to the other top of the world?
That's quite a long story, but I ended up traveling there with a friend of mine, and actually quite enjoyed London. So we talked about going back to. We were just traveling at the time, but we talked about going back together. And she ended up staying in Australia, but I decided to come back and just have a go for a year or two. And 10 years later, I'm still here.
Still here with growing family.
With a crying baby downstairs and a toddler.
Those are cool. So was there something about coming to England? Had you heard about something here that was attracting you towards, developing your osteopathic practice?
Not really. I had always just wanted to work abroad and see how practice was different to where I'd trained. So I'd been interested in that all along, not necessarily England, but I'd always wanted to have a bit of a variety of influence in the way I practiced. And England was obviously a bit more straightforward than a lot of the other countries.
Yeah. And I know that you ended up at the OCC, which was in a very pivotal part of your development in the time you spent there in training and working there afterwards. So how did that happen? How did you come to decide to enroll on the diploma?
Well, I was working at a practice in Salisbury, and I'd had a couple of parents bring their tiny, tiny babies into me who were 2 or 3 weeks old, and I knew enough to know that I didn't know enough when I was treating these babies. And so I just thought, if I was that mum or that dad bringing that baby in to see an osteopath, I wouldn't want them to come and see me at that point in time. So I knew I had to learn a bit more, and actually the lady I was working for had done the OCC.
So you've always managed to end up in a practice that's enabled you to really develop the direction that you wanted to go in, really.
Wow. Yeah. I never really had I foresaw my direction being very different when I first started practicing.
Yeah.
So it's digressed very drastically to what I'd first envisioned in a very lovely way.
Good. I'm very glad. And what about, so after finishing the OCC, I know a little bit because in the end you ended up in Bath to our great satisfaction and enjoyment. And obviously we've managed to do a lot of work starting the baby check clinic and working together and things. And I know Helen's in pausing at the moment on maternity leave. But I'm interested to know from your recent experiences of working in the clinic, in the baby clinic with the babies and also the mums. When you come back into practice, is there anything in particular that you're interested in developing further?
That's probably just hopefully increasing awareness and knowledge that osteopathy or other potential health disciplines can help with post maternal issues, really.
Yeah.
So, and just making that awareness out there that mums don't have to deal with all those things on their own or not at all.
Yeah.
Because it's a really uneducated part of healthcare, I think. Which
you're experiencing.
Yes, from a very personal experience.
Yeah, still aware of it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of awareness for children, which is wonderful. But actually, if the mums aren't physically or mentally able to look after their children as well as possible, then it kind of almost negates the care of the child in some way. And it's all become very heavily child-focused, which is also wonderful. But then the mothers are not focused on as much as they need to be, I don't think.
Well, that's really interesting, and we're really looking forward to continue developing that work. And it's great that you've got to that place, really.
Yeah, and then maybe fathers as well.
Yeah,
that would be the next bit because they're not mentioned at all.
Yeah, I think we've got that set up, hopefully, which will be
fingers
really
crossed.
Great. Yeah, so that's really interesting. That's a great span of your life that we've just covered in 10 minutes, and I think that's our time now, Helen. So it's really interesting to hear that little snippet of your journey through osteopathic life. And I think for all of us, in so many ways, we do end up with people who can, in situations and practices and environments that can help us, you know, develop in the way we like. Well, we don't always know we want to develop in that direction, but we find it very attractive.
Yeah.
Follow the path. So very nice to hear your story, and thank you very much. And we look
Thanks, Pete.
forward to your continuing the chain reaction with someone that you want to make contact with. Okay,
Super.
thanks very much.
Thanks, Pete.